This is our first time doing a faculty preview since early 2020 and our first time doing it online. Thank you for coming. And we're going to quickly go through many of the courses that are coming up for our fall session. And if you instructors could limit your time to 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great. I have a timer that is going to go off at 1.5 minutes. So if you kind of hear that ring, you'll know that it's time to wrap it up. The first person speaking is going to be Josh Horowitz, who's teaching a Zoom class. So listen, we're going to do 8 Zoom classes and 7 in-person classes in our fall session, which begins October 10th and runs through November 18th, I think. 6 weeks, 2 hours a week. Most of you know that routine. Okay, so the very first person speaking is Josh Horowitz, who is going to teach for the second time, this time more from the promiscuous world of Jewish music. Josh?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And can you see that?
Yay!
Okay, I'm Josh Horowitz, and this 6-part lecture series continues where we left off last year. But here we'll explore some of the peripheral forces that have helped immensely in forming Jewish music as we know it today from several different vantage points, emphasizing its weird and sometimes sordid underbelly. So in lecture 1, we find out why the music at Jewish weddings were such somber affairs where the bride had to cry prior to her betrothal, as you see here in this film. In lecture 2, we'll look at the synthesis of and the differences between Roma or Gypsy music and Jewish music and explore the fascinating interaction that sometimes ended in forbidden marriages, and look to find out, for instance, how a European Jewish band recording from 1914 can end up in a Roma band playing the same tune in the 1970s when they've never actually heard that early recording. We'll actually attempt an answer as to how do we get from there to here. In lecture 3, we'll use a case study of the life and music of a dapper 19th century traveling Hasidic musician who wowed the classical world with his homemade instrument and was so wildly influential that he took the classical world by storm and was so influential that even Mendelssohn, Liszt, and Paganini and many other musical celebrities were impressed by him. And was so wildly popular that his orthodox Hasidic hairstyle became the rage of Parisian women in the 1830s, but whose instrument becomes a circus curiosity while at the same time becoming integrated into the classical symphony orchestra. In lecture 4, I'll walk you through the only surviving pre-war Yiddish opera on the controversial story of David and Bathsheba, which we just performed in Toronto a few weeks ago after 100 years, and discuss how it was made and whether or not we should view it as a masterpiece. And in lecture 5, we'll go fearlessly through the bizarre world of Jewish superstitions and forbidden Jewish magical practices and how they manifest themselves in music, not only through the story of the demon Lilith, but also through the looking glass of our well-known classical composers who have used hidden symbols throughout history we'll also see their connection to Judaism. And in lecture 6, we'll concentrate on a certain musical instrument called the cymbal, seen here in the middle. And if you remember the name Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., the American actor best known in the TV series 77 Sunset Strip and the FBI, you'll find out how his name is actually a musical instrument that remains as the symbol of Jewry in Poland to this very day, but was the backbone of East European Jewish secular music for over 400 years, progressing from church to nobility, to virgins at home, and finally to Jewish and Roma itinerant musicians, only to fade into obscurity following its fascinating foray into a host of other East European folk traditions. So all of the lectures will feature copious imagery, music, and videos, followed by a lively Q&A, hopefully. Thank you for listening.
Thanks
I hope
so
I stayed
much.
within the confines.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Sure.
The next person to tell about her course is Diane Frank, who has taught with OLLI San Francisco State many, many times. She's teaching a writing course called Nature, Poetry, and the Language of the Spirit. Is limited in enrollment, which she will tell you there's only a few spaces left. Okay, Diane.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everyone who's here. I like to think of poetry as the language of the soul. It's a powerful technique to access your inner wisdom and express it with power and beauty. In this workshop, we will explore how to go beyond description with poems inspired by the natural world, wildness, meditative silence, leaping in light, how to write a poem that is larger than you are. And this is really important, that the poem is so powerful that it goes beyond the context of the person that wrote it, even if it's very personal, and writing techniques to make your language sing. All writers are welcome, from raw beginners to seasoned poets who need a jumpstart for their inspiration. Each session includes an inspiring writing exercise, the writer's toolbox to help your writing become more expressive, and a reading feedback circle. Every week, I'll be sharing poems that I love with you, the kind of poems that make me happy and grateful to be alive in this world. Then we'll focus on your poems so you can write with powerful and expressive language. My workshop method is very generous with praise and gentle with suggestions. I like to run my workshops as a love fest. Sharing a quote from Naomi Shihab Nye, I became a poet partly because of poetry's great mystery and partly because of a second grade teacher I had who believed that poetry was the center of the universe. The workshop meets on Mondays on Zoom, noon to 2 p.m., and I would love to see you there.
Thank you very much. It's actually 12:30 to 2:30, or I think it is. Okay, so poetry, that leads us directly into Janie Dresser, who is going to teach a course in person on the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and it's called Rilke on Life and Other Difficulties.
Rilke and on Life and Other Difficulties will launch in person in San Francisco on October 13th for 6 Thursday mornings. Rainer Maria Rilke, the Czech-Austrian poet, is probably one of the top poets of the 20th century. His work in prose and poetry is a bridge between 2 centuries and 2 literary movements, the Romantic period and modernism. While serving as the private secretary to the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, Rilke had a vision of his creative life and then dedicated himself to a lifestyle of solitude that would provide its framework, often leaving behind the brokenhearted who continued to have relationships with him throughout their lifetimes. A bit of a dandy and mostly a hermit, Rilke was drawn to people and they to him. He had one wife, Rodin's apprentice Clara Westhoff, and many lovers, among them the fascinating Lou Andreas Salome, a former lover of Friedrich Nietzsche and one of Freud's earliest trainees. Rilke got around. He traveled and lived in Prague, Paris, Switzerland, Italy, Munich, and traveled as far east as Russia, just as the revolution was breaking. He pandered to the wealthy, which brought friendship, castles, and the respect and love of noble patrons. Unsurprisingly, his work is not political and not religious in any orthodox sense, but it is highly spiritual. He left us simple and complex lyrical poems, as well as profound and demanding longer works. The themes are art, nature, consciousness, non-duality, and of course, love and God. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the publication of Rilke's greatest work, a series of 10 poems called the Duino Elegies. I approach the reading of great poetry with an open mind and curiosity about what sparked the poems, their historical context, and their music and formal construction. We will read Rilke's poetry and some of his prose in various English translations, which allows us to discuss the heated topic, at least in the rarefied world of poetry fanaticism, of whether poetry can even be translated. Throughout the course, we'll explore Rilke's life and world at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, using Ralph Friedman's biography, Life as a Poet, as a guide. I hope you'll join me on Thursday mornings in October and November to discover why Rilke continues to speak to so many people across time and across borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. Just so you all know, the in-person classes are at 160 Spear Street, which is near the Embarcadero BART and Muni station. And it's a really lovely, space and a lovely neighborhood. So if you haven't come downtown, please do. We have a large room, but there's plenty of space to spread out. Masks are at the moment encouraged in classes. So that's something for you to keep in mind. Next up is Andrew Fracknoy, who's going to teach a class called Everyday Astronomy, Orienting Yourself in Space, Time, and the Sky. And most of you know Andy Fracknoy, who's a star in his own right. Go for it, Andy. Oh, wait, you're muted.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Let me
Okay.
share my screen for a brief
Okay.
moment. Here we go. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, can you see them?
Yes.
Great. All right, so I'm going to be teaching a Zoom class on everyday astronomy, astronomy that has to do with everyday life. I often teach classes on the bizarre nature of black holes and the Big Bang and things like that, but this is a much more down-to-earth astronomy class. And we're going to be looking at a variety of questions and topics that relate to everyday life. We'll take a humorous approach. And for example, we'll talk about how the motions of the Earth and the motions of the moon affect the cycles of time that we sometimes take for granted. We'll answer a variety of questions that you may not even know you've had. For example, how fast are you moving when you think you're sitting still? Why does the Earth have seasons when many planets don't? Why do we have a moon when planets similar to us don't? Can the moon cause lunacy, crazy behavior, as many people believe? We'll do a variety of things actually about the moon. Let's see if I can. Well, if you've ever heard these expressions that the media are now fond of, the blood moon, the super moon, we'll talk about what those are and whether you should be worried about them. We'll talk about the question of moon madness and the moon illusion. And we'll even touch on astrology a little bit. Whether or not the position of the planets among the stars and the sun and the moon among the stars could affect your destiny or love life. And there have actually been scientific tests of this that many people don't know about. So I'll let you know what those tests reveal. I should mention that among the things that are happening in the sky are eclipses, where the moon gets in front of the sun. As many of you may remember that in 2017, we had a total eclipse of the sun visible from the United States. And lo and behold, we will have additional eclipses coming up in our country in 2023 and 2024. There will be an eclipse, which is annular, which means we'll see a ring of fire around the moon in 2023. And we'll see another total eclipse, spectacular total eclipse of the sun in 2024. So if you want to know what's happening and how you can get reservations before everybody else finds out about this, I encourage you to take Everyday Astronomy and get in touch with the sky. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. just a reminder that when the little alarm goes off, it's been a minute and a half. So then you have another minute or so. But we're moving right along. Next up is Julian Lopez Morias, and he taught a class we were talking about at the beginning called The Tempest, very, very early in the pandemic on Zoom, but this class will be in person, which is very exciting. Where are you, Julian? Let's see.
Right here.
Okay. I'm gonna spotlight you.
Okay. First of all, delighted to get back to in-person classes, which is where I'm more comfortable. And this class is rooted in my deep and abiding love for Arthur Miller, who I think of as the greatest American playwright. I'll engage in discussions with anybody that disagrees, but that's fine. My interest in Miller, several of the plays that I'm teaching, I will have either appeared in or directed in my professional career, is in how he managed to adapt the writing of tragedy to a modern democratic society. The roots of tragedy are in the Greeks, where it was essentially, it grew out of their religious functions, and the ideas of the relationship of man to the gods was then adopted by the Romans as kind of a public spectacle, disappeared from the scene for 1,000 years or so, reappeared in the Renaissance, and where they were the staple of the Elizabethan theater. And then it raises the question, I think, of since the doings of great men, almost always men's, a few women, were usually the essence of tragedy and in these earlier incarnations, and rooted in a very hierarchical structure of society, how a modern playwright has to deal with the problem of writing a tragedy in a society which doesn't really believe in tragedy, doesn't believe in the doings of great men and how they affect us. And I'm very interested in how Arthur Miller, and the plays I'll be particularly focusing on are The Crucible, The View from the Bridge, All My Sons, and Death of a Salesman, with also an animated version to his Holocaust play, Incident at Vichy. And I want to talk about how he managed to find a modern 20th century what's the word I'm searching for? A legitimate substitution of the great man theory to make his tragedies address the problem of the individual in society. And I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. We don't offer very many theater classes, so this will be really great to hear about Arthur Miller. I'm going to play you a video now from a new instructor named Sarah Childress, who teaches, I think, at Vanderbilt in Tennessee. Hang on just a second. Do you see that video? Okay. Wait a second. You know what I think I need to do is optimize sound. I'm not used to sharing videos. Let me try again. Optimize, share sound. Okay, hang on.
Hi, I'm Sarah Childress, and I'll be teaching film art and introduction to the formal elements of film. Through lectures, guided scene analysis, and class discussions, I'll introduce you to the marvels of mise-en-scène, cinematography, editing, and sound, and to how each communicates important narrative and psychological details while developing characters and themes. Each week, I'll use a specific film to demonstrate how these elements work and to focus our conversations. For example, we'll explore mise-en-scène in Sunset Boulevard, framing in The Third Man, depth of field in The Graduate, and continuity editing in The Maltese Falcon. Advanced viewing is not required, but will probably enhance your class experience. See you in the fall.
That looks pretty. Oops. Hang on, I got something going on here. Okay. Right, back to, okay. Next up, Charlie Goldberg will be teaching Paint It More Black, a deeper dive into Black art. This will be in person at 160 Spear Street. Charlie, there you go, good.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Charlie Goldberg. I'm going to be offering this course live. It's going to be Friday mornings from 10 till noon. It starts on the 14th and finishes, I think it's the last day of classes, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, just to get a little background about myself, I'm a docent at both the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and at MOAD, which is the Museum of the African Diaspora, which is right around the corner from the SF MoMA. I'm not sure how many of you have been there. It's a really charming little museum. It does not have a permanent collection. But I want to just show you these three works of art. And my guess is that most of you would know who these artists are, or I should say were. But I don't know how many of you would know who this artist is, and how important he is in terms of Black art. So what we're going to do in this class is we're going to look at some of the earliest depictions of Black Americans, and we're going to figure out who Phyllis Wheatley is and what this particular frontispiece for her book of poetry was all about, and who might have done this particular work. We're going to look at a lot of the early Black American artists, but we're also going to look at some really important topics that have really crucial roles in Black art history. We're going to think about the Great Migration and how that developed a really important Black middle class in the major cities of the United States. We're going to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, because we can't really talk about Black art without talking about this very, very important movement that gave voice to so many great artists. We're going to talk about the idea of patronage, either through the WPA, the Works Project Administration, the Harman Foundation, or the Guggenheim, how these Black artists were able to make enough money so that they could explore their artistic ideas. We're going to talk about Paris, because who doesn't want to talk about Paris? But in particular, we're going to talk about how important Paris was for Black artists. And here we have James Baldwin, the famous poet. We have Josephine Baker, who I'll make an allusion to in a little bit. We're also going to talk about the Art Institute of Chicago. Why would we talk about that? You're going to find out when you take my course. We're also going to discuss the idea of colorism and what that means for Black artists. There's a really wonderful work of art that actually uses a brown paper bag as part of the art. And we're going to talk about why that was so important. We're going to look at some great Black photographers. In particular, I love this photographer, Mohali, who uses the pronoun they, from South Africa, but we're going to look at lots of other great Black photographers as well. But we're also going to discover some new current artists. This is one of my particular favorites. It's a woman named Njideka Akunyili Crosby, who's from Nigeria, but now lives in the United States, and just why her art is so fascinating. But more than anything else, we're just going to look at some great works of art and have a lot of fun exploring why a work like this makes our eyes move all over the canvas, why movement and isn't both implied and given to a particular work of art. Or something like this, which is a good example of folk art or outsider art, and why it may or may not work for you as an artistic style. And here is just a wonderful work. We talked about Josephine Baker. I think you'll recognize that banana skirt here in the corner. And we'll talk all about this particular artist and the different ways that she has expressed herself over the years. So it's going to be Painted Black, a survey of mostly American Black artists. It's going to again be Friday from 10 to 12 and through the dates. I think this is the last class that will be given. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Next up, Steve Harris will be teaching Here is Now, the Nature of the Modern World. This is a 3-week course in person at 160 Spear. So take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, it's 3 weeks because we hardly have anything to cover. You know, Karl Marx said, all that is solid melts into air. He was trying to comprehend the great degree of change that was happening in the middle of the 19th century. And things, of course, have only accelerated since. We can look back to August of 1789, where the French National Assembly abolished the feudal system and set in motion the Great French Revolution. That was one component of the start of the modern world. In 1758, Carl Linnaeus published a list of 10,000 entries in his new 2-part naming system for plants and animals, simplifying a confusing mix of languages and taxonomies. He went on to invent the index card. So we see several steps towards organizing the burgeoning amount of information that was becoming available. In 1829, George Stephenson invented or demoed the rocket locomotive. It set a record running at 30 miles an hour and was a key step in the Industrial Revolution. And in the 1850s, as we know, Baron Haussmann rebuilt central Paris. We don't know that George Bazalgette constructed a mammoth public sewage system in London. Cities were growing, and the resulting complications had to be addressed. There are thousands of other events we could cite. The modern world wasn't born in a day, but it's very different than what came before, radically so in many ways. Even how radical it might be, it's hard for us to see because our lives take most of these changes for granted. So it's kind of like asking a fish to describe the water in which it swims. In these lectures, and they'll be highly illustrated with maps and graphs and pictures, we're going to try to stop swimming and look around, take some different perspectives, and use some different frameworks to see what this water of modernity looks like. So what do I mean when I talk about the modern world? There are a bunch of characterizations that come to mind: capitalist, urban, global, democratic, individualized, rational, technologic, state-driven, and dynamically changing. Over the 3 sessions of this course, we'll start with the physical world, our bodies and the globe. Then we'll look at the modern mentalite. How do we think differently about time, knowledge, science, and art? And finally, we'll turn to 3 frameworks of how humans interact: economies, polities, and societies and cultures. Throughout these lectures, I hope we'll have at least as much discussion. All of us have our own experience of the modern world, and I hope we'll share ideas and perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to play the next video. Let me see here. Because I think John Prescott is not here right now. Is that right? Didn't see his name. Lena, maybe keep an eye out for him. Okay, let me share the next video. There's all my email. This is Richard Bell, who you may have taken a course from. He teaches at the University of Maryland. He teaches history. He totally found his calling. He's a terrific instructor. And he'll be teaching the History Wars, the 1619 Project, and Critical Race Theory.
Hello everyone, my name's Rick Bell. I'm a professor of history at the University of Maryland. Welcome to my basement studio. And this fall I'll be offering a 6-part course called History Wars, about the 1619 project and CRT. It's going to explain what these projects, intellectual and journalistic, actually are. It's going to try to investigate why they've become so controversial, and it's going to give you a lot of historical background for understanding the interventions made by critical race theory in how we understand the history of the United States in relation to race, and it's going to help you assess what the 1619 project from the New York Times gets right and gets wrong about the complexities of American history. So we'll take a deep dive into the role of slavery in the American Revolution and the Constitution. We'll examine the racial politics of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War era, and we'll offer a new history of race and racial progress after 1965 through the lens of CRT. So if you've been reading and hearing a lot about the 1619 Project and CRT, but want to find out what's true and what's not, this, I think, is the course for you.
Hang on. I'm going to play you one more video now. This is Maureen O'Brien de Geller teaching Diego Rivera's artistic vision of North America. Got a lot of screens open here.
Hello, I'm Maureen O'Brien de Geller, and I'm going to be teaching a 6-week class called Diego Rivera's Artistic Vision of North America, and that begins Monday, October the 10th. I'm teaching the class in conjunction with an exhibit of Diego Rivera's work that's presently at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art through January of next year. San Francisco, we know, is a city with a large collection of wall murals. You see murals not only on the buildings, but when you come downtown to your OLLI classes, you can view the mural series, The History of San Francisco, inside the Rincon Center across the street. So the history of contemporary mural art begins in the 1920s with the Mexican mural movement headed by Diego Rivera. He was born in Mexico, but for 10 years he spent in Europe studying traditional and modern art, as well as traditional techniques for creating murals. He returned to San Francisco in 1921 after the conclusion of the Mexican Civil War and began painting murals on public buildings. These promoted political ideas regarding the social revolution that had just recently ended. So we're going to look at Diego Rivera's art education in Europe, his murals in Mexico, and the commissions that he undertook in the United States in the 1930s and 40s. So we're going to focus on murals created in New York, Detroit, and San Francisco, such as the ill-fated Rockefeller Center mural, some portable murals that he created for the New Workers' School in New York, an expansive series of murals for the Detroit Industry of Art, and also the 3 major works in San Francisco: the Allegory of California at the City Club of San Francisco, Pan American Unity, which is now on view at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the making of a fresco at the now closed San Francisco Art Institute. We'll also look at the fresco commissioned by Sigmund and Rosalie Stern, now in the collection of the University of California at Berkeley. We're also going to look closely at the work that was influenced by Diego Rivera in San Francisco, particularly Coit Tower, the Beach Chalet, and the Interfaith Chapel at the Presidio. There will be also time to study many, many portraits that were commissioned by him, including notable business people such as Edsel Ford, the art collector Chester Dale, and socialites such as Frances Ford Seymour, the mother of actress Jane Fonda. So I hope to see you on Mondays, beginning October 10th, from 10 to noon, live in the OLLI Classroom, 160 Spear Street. Hello,
Okay, I think we still don't have, there are 2 other instructors that we're going to speak live, John Prescott and Richard Robbins, but we will go on to one more video that I have from Rick Harrell. So there are 2 3-week courses. Steve Harris just told us about his, and then once his is finished, another 3-week course will begin, which is called Giants of the American Musical Theater by Rick Harrell. And these 2 3-week classes, just so you know, you don't have to be a member. That we're treating them sort of like more like the mini courses. So feel free to invite people. And I'm gonna find the video now. Where? Hang on, I don't know how to make that smaller. Here we go. Too many screens. Okay, hold on. This is why I'm not teaching. I'll get back to you guys. Okay, share screen. There's Rick.
Hello, my name is Rick Harrell, and I hope you'll join me this fall in a brief history of the American musical theater. We'll explore 3 of the most important composers and lyricists of Broadway: Jerome Kern, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Stephen Sondheim. In the first session, we'll take a brief look back into the European operetta, which is the form that spawned what we now call Broadway. Then we'll take a deeper dive into Jerome Kern's masterpiece of a musical, Showboat. Showboat, with its complex characters, is considered by many to be the first book musical. In the second session, we'll be looking at Rodgers and Hammerstein. Their groundbreaking composition, Oklahoma, ushered in the golden age of the Broadway musical. In the final session, we'll be looking at Stephen Sondheim. No one in the history of the American musical theater has evolved the art form farther or faster than Stephen Sondheim. And of course, through all of this, we'll be seeing video performances by some of the greatest American musical theater performers that ever lived. So, I hope to see you in November. So long.
Very good. Okay. We have a special guest here today, Jackie Davis Martin, who I'm going to have you jump in if you don't mind, Jackie. You're muted.
No, of course not. I'd be delighted to. Yes.
Jackie is teaching a mini course on September, what's the date?
26th.
September 26th, called Shakespeare's 2 Takes on Mark Antony. This is a mini course. It's just 2 hours. She will share it. I'm going to spotlight you.
Okay. Yes, I'm rather thrilled to join this illustrious family of illustrators. I've enjoyed hearing what you're teaching. I'm a great Shakespeare enthusiast, as well as an enthusiast of musical theater. I enjoyed that recording. I am talking about, or we're going to be looking at, Mark Antony, 2 different ways Shakespeare has presented him. I mean, Mark Antony appears, as everybody knows, in Julius Caesar for the first time with his friends, Romans, countrymen speech. And it's just the art of persuasion. He's a great leader. He ends up defeating Brutus and Cassius in that play. And he takes over as one of the major triumvirs of Rome. And the audience is fully confident that he's capable of doing this. We pick him up later on in Antony and Cleopatra, my favorite among Shakespeare's plays, or one of them anyway, where he is still a great leader, a triumvir, but he is neglecting everything because of his great love affair with Cleopatra, hanging out in Egypt. And eventually he makes enormous decisions that affect his entire government, his fate, his life, and everything based on just his weakness for her. So what I will be doing in these 2 hours is talking about the plays, the structure of the plays, which is just, I mean, people do not have to have read the play. I have handouts, kind of an old-fashioned approach, handouts that are scenes of, in Julius Caesar, of Mark Antony's speeches, his scenes with others, to show how capable he is, as well as talking about sort of the sweep of Antony and Cleopatra, zeroing in on scenes of Antony and Octavius, Antony and Cleopatra, in the midst of their debauchery, and then later on at the end where he is dying in her arms. his famous line, "I am dying, Egypt dying." So we're going to look at those particular scenes, but basically, this is not a history of Mark Antony. Shakespeare certainly based it on history, but this is Shakespeare, his language, his imagery, his rhythms, and how he establishes this character, as well as the characters around him. So, and I will welcome any kind of input from people, their comments, etc. But that's basically going to be what we're doing. As I say, we have handouts. We'll look at the two plays and talk about Shakespeare and Mark Antony. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for coming, Jackie. Jackie's class will be a mini course, so different from the other fall courses that we've got coming up. And it will be in person at 160 Spear. It's a one-time course. We'll make sure you see all of the, how to get to the catalog at the end. Is any other instructor here? Richard Robbins? Is that you, Rob? It says, hang on, I'm asking to unmute. You're muted right now.
Yeah.
Great. Very good. Okay, so hang on a second.
Sure.
Wait, are you Richard or Rob?
Well, everyone calls me Rob, but my real name is Richard. So you can either one is fine. Yeah.
Well, very good. Okay, so Richard Robbins is going to be teaching late Imperial Russia, 1855 to 1914. This will be an in-person class. I'm going to spotlight you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I'm Richard Robbins, or Rob Robbins, Professor Emeritus of Russian History from the University of New Mexico, but I live in San Francisco. And I've taught Russian history for over 40 years. And I've even given some OLLI courses, but way back. I think last one was in 2017. I would say this is going to be about late Imperial Russia, the period from roughly 1855 to 1914. It's a period that today is undergoing some serious re-examination and reconsideration, especially in the light of the collapse of the Soviet Union and what followed that. The course is roughly chronological, but I'm going to spend time talking about some specific topics of considerable interest. We'll start with talking about autocracy. Everyone's talking about autocracy these days with good reason. We'll take up the question of why Russia had an autocracy, how that autocracy worked, what it had accomplished in the past, and then we will look at one of the great achievements of the Russian autocracy. These are the so-called great reforms of the 1860s and 70s, the largest piece of social, political, economic engineering that took place in Europe in the 19th century, restructuring, which along the way led to the emancipation of over 90 million people from slavery across Eurasia. We'll turn then to the dreaded I word, a word that many people wanted expunged from the Russian language, that is to say, the word intelligentsia. The intelligentsia, we're going to look at its origin, its nature, its role in the development of oppositional subculture, and we're going to talk about the emergence out of the intelligentsia and through the intelligentsia of Russian socialism, the rise of terrorism, and its consequences. And then we will turn to the period of the 1880s and 90s. We'll look at the counter reforms and repressions that followed the assassination of Alexander II. We will explore the explosive 1890s, which saw the social and political reawakening, economic expansion, agrarian difficulties, the emergence of new classes, and the emergence of troubling questions about Russia and its future. Then we'll turn to the Revolution of 1905. We'll look at its causes, its course, and its consequences. But I think perhaps even more important, we'll try to consider its significance. Was this, as Lenin said, simply the dress rehearsal for 1917? Or was it something else? Did it mark the beginning of a new and more hopeful Russia, a hopeful turn in Russian history, a history that doesn't have a lot of hopeful turns in it. And then in our penultimate session, we'll consider the years between 1907 and the outbreak of the First World War, focusing really on two key figures, Nicholas II, the limited autocrat, limited in many ways. And we will also talk about, of course, Pyotr Stolypin, the visionary reformer and the would-be savior of the Tsarist regime. But at the same time, we'd like to consider some cultural trends and moods, both light and dark, at the turn of the century in Russia. And finally, I guess in the last session, we'll try something of a summing up of the period as a whole, to consider the complex situation of Russia as it was in 1914, and the many changes, looking back on the many changes that had occurred since the 1860s, and assessing to some degree their potential for further development. The real question that hangs over this last session will be, where was Russia going? Was its direction set, determined by social and political forces, or was the future really open to be determined not by the laws of history, but by the play of the contingent and the unforeseen? So if that sounds interesting to you, I hope you'll join me in October and November.
Very good. Thank you so much. And welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. There are 3 other Zoom classes that I will tell you about. I don't think that John Prescott is here. Many of you have probably taken classes from him, classical music, Gilbert and Sullivan, etc. He's going to be teaching a class on Zoom on the composer Benjamin Britten, a composer of contrasts. And then Elliot Levine, or Levine, I think he pronounces it Levine, is teaching. He tunes in from, I think he's up in Portland or somewhere. He's teaching
Vancouver,
noir
Washington.
and what?
Vancouver, Washington.
I think he lives there, but he may teach in Oregon. Anyway, wherever he is, he's tuning in, and he's teaching noir and blacklist. We will provide links to the instructions on how to reach the films, watch the films ahead of time, and then you tune in for a conversation. And then Jared Day will be returning. He's teaching Industrial Giant, the Rebuilding of America After the Civil War, 1865 to 1901. That'll be a series of lectures about what was going on in those years post Civil War. So I was going to maybe share my screen and just show you, if you were to go to our website, which is olli.sfsu.edu, the sites are kind of confusing. Then you go to courses. Under courses, this is where you would always find the list of all of the courses that are coming up. The multi-week courses is this fall session that we're talking about right now, right? Here's Benjamin Britten, for instance. Click on that. You go over to our catalog, and then you can log in and choose the class. You have to be a member to take any of these 6-week courses, but not the 2 3-week courses. So that's How Is Now. That's a 3-week course, and Giants of the American Musical Theater. And then under the mini courses, that's where you're going to find Shakespeare's 2 Takes on Mark Antony, which Jackie just told us about. And if you have any questions at all, just email us at olli@sfsu.edu. We can put that in the chat. Does anyone have any questions while you're here before you go? Well, nice to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hope to see you in later this month or in October, November.
Everyone.